And Jeffrey said, well, how do you know that this is the problem? And I said, because I helped write some of these reports. And I don't know how the final analysis was done. And the data that our team provided to the World Bank doesn't add up to the results that are in this report. And I feel uneasy about it. And so Jeffrey said, well, tell me what this project would look like, and we'll find some funds to make it happen. So Brownstone underwrote this academic project, which is to look at 4 things, and now 5 things, because we got an extension, because we've had rather good success with REPPARE. The 4 things we were looking at is, what is the evidence base that is underpinning these new policies that are accelerating very quickly at the global level? And we've examined that, and we'll give you some of the results of that. What is the financial components of it? What are the costings that we're being told are required in order to have a sufficient pandemic preparedness response at the global level? And what sort of return on investments are they using, or calculations are they using to justify these really unprecedented and enormous amounts that they're asking? The third part of the project was to look at the governance structure. Okay, well, what institutions are being formed? Why are these being formed? How well are they being supported with the evidence? And what are some of the dynamics taking place within that policy space at the global level? Who are the main actors? How are they getting the agenda set, et cetera? And then the fourth one was to come up with a series of recommendations. Now, that's sort of been prolonged in this extra year because we've decided to take on another step to the project, which I'll get to at the end. So that's one project, and that's a singular funded through a grant. The grant is held by myself at the University of Leeds. We work with the University of Ghent. We work with academics in Brazil. We work with academics in America. David is the co-lead on the project. We have postdocs. We have PhDs. And what we've been able to do through Brownstone Resources is mobilize a team when and where we need expertise. So when we're looking at global burden disease, or what is the disease of a pandemic, which there is no established methodology for figuring that out. Really, it's about excess mortality, but that's like taking a hammer into a china shop. So, we've done that work with the University of Ghent. We're doing these things. We can pull in people when we can. And there was only one stipulation from Brownstone, right? The contract blew my university away. They didn't know how to deal with it. They want these big, long contracts where all the terms of reference are laid out, what you can, can't do, how you can report, how you can't report, data management, the whole thing. It was everything that we produce has to be open access, and there is a generous APC charge, or fund, that's how you clear copyrights, to do so. And that was it. And everything else we set up and everything else we run, and there's no interference, and this is honestly an independent evaluation of this agenda, and you'll get that. The next project is International Health Reform Project. Now, this project has been around for a while, and as we know, the WHO has some issues. It hasn't always performed well. It does some things okay, and it has historically done some things well. There are some collective action problems at the global level that it would be nice to have an international health organization help deal with. Counterfeit medicines, for example, is a problem. And WHO is largely the only one kind of trying to deal with this, other than a small division at Interpol. And then independent states doing it how they see fit, some doing it better than others. So we were asked to pull together a panel of experts. David is the chair. I'm a panel member because we had been working together for a couple of years, and he said, I can trust you to work well on this and do what you say you'll do. And we formed this panel, and we're going to tell you a little about this. It's about thinking about reforming the WHO, replacing the WHO. What would an international health organization look like? Assuming we need an international health organization for collective action problems of some sort, what would that remit look like? What principles should it be based on? And how can then we, using that sort of ideal type, evaluate the current WHO to see where the problems are in that? So, for example, I'm handling the financing section of it and some other stuff on the legitimacy and governance and accountability mechanisms within the WHO, where they work and where they don't work. And believe me, There are good things and bad things. So today we're going to tell you about these two projects. We're going to start by laying out the evidence base that has been driving this pandemic preparedness and response agenda. And then I'm going to frighten you to tell you what's already been established and what they've already done. And then what we're doing about that. And by frightening you, some of it is not wrong, right? Pandemics do happen. But it's the accelerated way they're doing it, the lack of thinking through the evidence of how to do it better, and the lack of reflection about what was done wrong during COVID, that is worrying a little bit. So we'll get to that in a minute. So David will take you through what is the pandemic risk? We're told it's an existential threat. Well, what's the basis of that claim? Thank you.
Thanks, Garrett. So there's a few slides here that people might have seen at the meeting last year, but otherwise it's new, but it'd be useful to go back through them. So as Garrett said, we'll talk about the pandemic risk and burden and what our governments are being told. And, the governments are doing this and that. A lot of that is because they're actually being given information and they're acting on it. And I'm going through what that information is. Garrett will talk about the financing, and then we'll talk about IHRP, which is a separate project, but obviously there's some overlap. So a lot of people hopefully have seen this graph, and it's infectious disease over the last 100 years or so, 150 years. And what it shows is that this is for England and Wales, but Australia is the same, US is the same, etc. Developed country, Europe is the same. Most infectious diseases that were killing people went away by about the 1940s or 50s. And then we introduced vaccines, and they went away a little bit more on the same trajectory. And, among those is, you can say maybe smallpox vaccine had an effect, but among those, the red one is scarlet fever, for which there is no vaccine, but it still went the same trajectory. So for whatever reason, and it's almost certainly nutrition, sanitation, living space, etc., and some antibiotics, most infectious disease mortality went away in developed countries by about the 1950s or 60s, and then we introduced mass vaccination. It's kept going a little bit lower. Vaccinations got rid of the circulation of viruses quite a lot, but it hasn't done much change in mortality. That was already gone. In parallel, this is for the last 30 or 40 years, we see on the left, world population going up, but infectious disease on the right going down there within the red box there. So infectious disease has been dropping steadily. The little lump at the end is COVID, and it did cause an increase in mortality, which is attributed to COVID. It took us back to about 2010. So that was the pandemic. It was the same as 2010, when we remember we weren't all dying in the streets. So that was the extent of it. So that is what's happening with infectious disease. We live in a world where it's almost gone, essentially, in terms of mortality for most of us. What the WHO is telling countries is that epidemics, pandemics of infectious disease coming more often, spreading faster than ever, potential fatal combination of newly discovered diseases, etc. Since the beginning of the 21st century, we've experienced major epidemics and pandemics every 4 to 5 years. So you may have missed them, but these are the two 2023 publications from WHO. They're the only ones in the last 5 years. They're the key ones on what is happening with pandemics and what to do about them in epidemics. So this is what governments, health workers, the media sees. This is what WHO is saying, which is a contrast to what we saw. So as Garrett said, we've been looking at this. We've put out a series of reports, peer-reviewed papers, several more in the process. It is, as other people have said, a struggle to get a lot of these papers out in peer review, but we're slowly getting there. So this is the only bit of evidence in those two WHO publications that I just showed from 2023. It's the only evidence they give to back their assertions, and it's this chart, and it's in both. And it shows that in 2000 there was no pandemics or epidemics, and since then things have got really bad. And now there's a whole string of them, about 7 or 8 ongoing at the moment. And so the story you get from looking at this graphic is that, we have rapidly increasing threat of outbreaks, and the world used to be much safer than it is now. And that's what WHO is saying, and that's what our governments believe, by and large. So what this should show is that virtually all of these obviously were there in 2000 and were actually much, much worse in the past. This includes, there's 3 coronavirus outbreaks there. 2 of them only killed 1,000 people, or less than 1,000. The other one is COVID. But we've always had coronavirus outbreaks. We've just developed the techniques to detect them recently. So what the WHO should say from this chart is that we once had really bad outbreaks, plague, yellow fever, cholera, influenza, all on this. They used to kill far more people than they do now. Now very few people die. So this is a classic case of misinformation. It fits exactly the WHO definition of misinformation, but this is the WHO's official publications on pandemics and epidemics, and it's what our governments believe and see. So it's not just the WHO, this is the G20 and World Bank. Both documents developed for the G20 summit in 2022, which backed the pandemic agreement of the WHO and the International Health Regulation Changes Amendments. So existential threat of deadly and costly pandemics, 300 to 700 times return on investment. You put $1 in, you get $300 to $700 back. So what government could say no? And the bottom one is asking, this is asking for $3 billion that Garrett will get into per year. The bottom one says from the World Bank's asking for another $10 billion for One Health on top of that, because there's a growing number of outbreaks which become pandemics. So go first, the first one, the G20 high-level panel, and there's only 2 appendices that give any evidence to back these claims. This is one of them. So it's this list it's this table on the left. It's got a year since 2000 to 2020, and it's got an outbreak. And we put numbers to those on the highest number of mortality, the highest mortality for that disease that year, which is on the right. So you can see over 20 years, for what they call major outbreaks the past 2 decades, it was 189,000 deaths in over 20 years. So every year, 1.3 million people die of tuberculosis. So this is tiny. Nearly all of these, 160,000 odd, are from swine flu, which killed less in 2009 than flu normally does, just seasonal flu every year in old people. And the other 2, West Africa Ebola and cholera outbreak that came from a UN compound in Haiti, because they didn't do good sanitation there. And that is the outbreaks for the last 20 years. That's the sole basis, essentially, of these claims of the G20 high-level panel. The World Bank report has these 2 interesting graphs, and they're, I'll go into these in a bit more detail. So what they're showing is that the one on the left, in 1960, almost no outbreaks in the world. For those who might have been born then, you'll remember everything was fine, no one died. And then outbreaks went up, and then, interestingly, they've dropped down again, but they don't really talk about that. They say a 6.7% increase from 1980 onwards. And then on the right, they say, encroaching natural habitats is the driver of this zoonotic spillover. And they have this graph, but what this graph shows is they actually go up as you destroy habitat, then they go down again as you destroy even more, because you wiped out the wildlife, which might be carrying the virus. So actually, it's a very complex, and it's not clear that it's increasing. So just going to that first one, and the same publication has, these are from the citations. So there's multiple publications out that show the same pattern, an increase from almost nothing, and then it drops down after 2010, which is really interesting and is not addressed in any of these reports. And what is probably happening? We see an increase because we can detect them. In 1960, we didn't have PCR, we didn't have point-of-care antigen tests, didn't have gene sequencing. This is how we detect outbreaks and distinguish them from the background. So we've developed the technologies to find these things. And so we see an increase, and we report far more outbreaks. We're also putting more money in, we have more publications, we're getting better roads so you can get to clinics and find the outbreak. So, and then that's sort of meeting what we saw earlier, which is the background reduction in infectious disease, because we're getting better medicine and better healthcare. So probably we would expect from this over the next 20, 30 years, we're going to continue to see this decrease, even though we're getting better at detecting, because our detection now is sort of getting near saturation. That's probably what we're seeing in these graphs. And this sort of backs at it's from a publication of Smith et al. In 1980, at the top there, you can see most outbreaks were reported in developed countries. And in sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, very few outbreaks reported. Now, no one in their right mind can believe there's no outbreaks in Africa in 1980. But we didn't have PCR there by then. We didn't have gene sequencing, etc. And you see at the bottom in the box there, you've essentially filled in this area in the tropics where there's poorer countries, because we've pushed out diagnostics to that level. So you're seeing an increase in outbreak reporting, not an increase in outbreaks, and it's because we have better technology. This is not addressed in any of the publications from the World Bank, G20, WHO, etc. we've gone through, but it's almost certainly, overwhelmingly, the major reason why these graphs are going up. And this is, we published on this zoonotic spillover in one of the Springer Nature papers. And so we are getting stuff out, but it's the only paper out there we could find that really addresses this. And the graph is from another paper that we quote there, but it shows the same thing. You get more outbreaks with reforestation in higher latitudes, like where we are now. You get more outbreaks with deforestation in lower latitudes, so near the equator. But that coincides with this rollout of detection as well. So, it's a complex picture, the zoonotic spillover. Probably it's decreasing, but almost every publication you read, it'll say it's increasing and this is driving pandemics. And the evidence is almost certainly the other way. So briefly on pandemic burden, and people, will see figures, 2.5 million people die every year from pandemics, and that's out there. WHO agrees with it. It's a well-used figure. It was the basis of a Lancet Commission report, etc. Comes from the Ginkgo Bioworks, which is a company that does data processing for biology. And they have a report that we also published on, which goes into this. So we can see here on this table from their report, there's thousands on the right-hand column. So it's 2.5 million people every year die from pandemics, on average, annualised average. Now, in COVID, the WHO report about 7.5 million dead over 3-4 years. So they're saying it's even worse than COVID every year. So it's a nonsensical thing, but this is what is being reported and is what governments and so on understand. And the reason for this, and this is also from their report, so this is how they do their data. And you can see on the left-hand column, the left-hand graph, it has the frequency of outbreaks by size. And there's almost no big outbreaks, like almost none in their database. There's lots of very small outbreaks. On the right-hand, it's the size of the outbreak. And it's dominated by those ones at the top, which are 100, 200, 300 million deaths. This is all there's none of these happened since we invented antibiotics 100 years ago. And it's dominated by like the bubonic plague in the medieval times and so on. So that's how they get 2.5 million a year now. So they're essentially taking the bubonic plague and medieval outbreak deaths, and they put it into the model, and they put it against today's population, and then they say that's 2.5 million on average per year. So it's completely nonsensical, and you're laughing, but this is what is published, and this is what's quoted, this is what the Lancet quotes, this is what the WHO quotes, this is what our governments believe. It's completely nonsensical. They do the same with viral hemorrhagic fever. We have 18,000 at the bottom there per year on average dying. The largest Ebola outbreak, which is the biggest viral hemorrhagic fever we have, was 11,000, the West Africa one 10 years ago.
2014.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. They've taken, and it's unclear where they got them, because they've taken these enormous viral hemorrhagic outbreaks that aren't reported in history, and they put that into the model, and you put it against today's population, And there we are, we have 18,000 a year. But this hasn't happened in recorded history. So, but this is driving, this is what is driving the pandemic agenda. It seems stupid, but it's what it is. Just last year on quantifying COVID burden. And the global burden of disease, IHME, which is University of Washington, fully funded by the Gates Foundation. And, well, it is. And that's where they get money. But this is the gold standard for the world for disease burden. So, and it's very good. Their figures are very good for a lot of this, diabetes, cancer rates, and it's what the whole world uses. It's the gold standard for disease burden. So they put out their COVID data over the last few years in a series of papers in Lancet. And this is some graphs from their paper. So it's really interesting. This is excess mortality, and they're attributing most of this to COVID. And you see immediately, the red is the highest. Sub-Saharan Africa, where less than 1% of the population is over 75 and half the population is under 20, are the highest burden. So something is going wrong, yeah? And, okay, South America did have problems, but it just doesn't fit with what we know is true. So what they've done, and it took us a long time to dig into this, and even the people at IHME, we didn't find anyone who fully understands the model because it's extremely complex, and there's thousands of people around the world doing this. So they've taken COVID mortality and excess mortality. COVID is reported, deaths from COVID, and, they're underreporting, overreporting, whatever, it's what's reported. And there's issues, obviously, with what is a death from COVID, but this is what they use. So it's about 7.5 million, according to the WHO. And then we have the total excess mortality, which is going to be pretty accurate, because we're good at assessing excess mortality in nearly all countries, total mortality. So this is the excess. So then they've put into their model, they put a model on the COVID numbers per country and per region. And they've said, well, masks are, quote unquote, incredibly effective at stopping COVID. And therefore, if a country didn't use a mask very much, the model bumps up the mortality. Social distancing is very effective. So if they don't use social distancing much, they bump up the mortality. So they increase it so that nearly all that excess mortality becomes COVID rather than the cost of lockdown, the cost of, and this is, so then this is what now, yeah. Yeah.
Is that just by adjusting a parameter value?
Yeah, they do by country. So countries that have reported a lot of, sorry?
I couldn't hear the question. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if the model adjustment was based on just adjusting the parameter value for a term that represented mass use. They have the mortality, and they break it down by country, and large countries by parts of country. They look at, they get mask use, off all sorts of surveys, from Facebook surveys to all sorts of things. They take mask use, they take vaccination, and they assume, for instance, that vaccines stop 95% of mortality. And that's their table, that it's about 85 to 95% effective in stopping mortality, etc. So they look at the original numbers, then they look at the vaccine use. The US they take as it is because they trust the data. Countries like Sub-Saharan Africa, where they don't trust the data, they say, well, they hardly used any masks. So the model then increases it by several factors. They only had 20% vaccination, not 90%, so we'll increase it more because they must be underreporting, because we know that if they didn't use vaccine, they didn't use masks, in fact, they must have had more deaths than they're reporting. So this is what it is. But it's hard to find anyone in IHRP, and I was writing to people who did this, trying to understand who did what and to understand the data. And there's no one there who really understands it, because it's such a huge, massive, complex database and such a massive model. We went through hundreds of pages.
And 600 people work on it.
How many?
Yeah.
What kind of model was it? Do you know?
I can give you the papers. It's all at IHME, but there's no one who can tell you exactly how it works.
Anything over 3 variables is garbage.
Oh, this has got lots and lots of variables. No, it's an extremely complex model. Yeah. Well,
But anyway, but
It's hundreds of pages long.
we went through hundreds and hundreds of pages of supplementary data to just try and understand it. So, and we're trying to get this published. We've been trying for a year. No one wants to publish it because we're questioning the gold standard for COVID numbers. And this gold standard is now used by WHO, now used by
G20.
Our World in Data, G20, etc. So this has become mainstream. So now instead of WHO's 7.5 million, it's become about 15 million over those first 2 years, etc. So this is how history is made, and now history will believe the global burden of disease because it's a gold standard, and that's how, this is the base of the numbers, and no one knows it because no one's going to read hundreds of pages of supplementary data of the model, except us who can't publish it yet. So,
Right.
yeah, I'll hand over to Garrett.
So I'll make this rather quick because I think the governance stuff is which we have a third report. So that was the first report. The second report was on costings and financing, which has been around for a while. It's on Brownstone. The third one is on the governance structure and the current architecture, and that we're just finalizing that report now. In fact, the postdoc is busy formatting and adding bits and while we're here. So we hope to have that out by the end of the month. But this is kind of important because this report came out, so the G20 had a leaders summit and they asked the WHO and World Bank to put together what would it cost to put together the right pandemic preparedness and response machinery at the global level. And this was in 2022. Now, I said earlier that I had some doubts about this report because I had worked on this report. So I was part of a research team that was looking at global level response costings. There's not a lot of data out there. There's a lot of extrapolations. There was a lot of filling in numbers based on kind of intuitions and whatnot. And that data was fed over to the WHO. And then this report showed up, and I don't know how the analysis was done. So it kind of sparked some interest in me. But what are they asking for? They're asking for $31.1 billion a year, with a 10.5 in new overseas development fund, our official development assistance for this agenda, for getting us properly prepared. And I'll tell you what that looks like in a minute. And then an additional $10.5 billion a year for what's called One Health. And One Health is sort of a concept of all animal health and soil and water and all these things are mixed together. And so you can't have proper preparedness against zoonosis or any sort of new outbreak unless you're completely taking everything together as One Health. Now, conceptually, it's great, but it's also incredibly expensive. So one thing that I can tell you, and I don't go into the costing, is the cost for both national level pandemic preparedness and the cost at the global level for $31.1 billion annually is pretty much a guesstimate. They took 5 countries that had full reporting on what they pay for and then extrapolated that to 194 countries. Now, what countries would probably keep that kind of record of what they do for pandemic preparedness? Very rich countries. And so you get this massively inflated number for what it would cost to address this. And they do say this in the literature, in the reports. They say, well, this is how we did it. We extrapolated it. They don't tell you what the 5 countries are. And they don't have an appendix with a fully spelled out methodology, but they kind of tell you that that the data wasn't available, so they had to kind of guesstimate. But that's not as interesting as what they did for the return on investment. And I also have to say one other thing is there's a McKinsey and Company report on pandemic preparedness that was generated before the pandemic. And this is cited by everybody. Now, it's a really short little report on what they estimated the costs would look like. Interesting enough, they did a second edition of that, and the World Bank did a second edition of that report that you see. They cite each other for counter-verification, but they originally cited each other for counter-verifications. So it's a circular citation. Why don't you know it's true? Because McKinsey has said our report is right, which we cited and used as a basis of our first edition, right? So of course it's going to be right because you're using the same numbers. Anyway, so there's a lot of circular citations going on. But the thing that was probably most frightening to me was the return on investment, because the really rookie errors that were being made in here. And there was no methodology at all on how they put together the economic costs or how they set up their return on investment. And so we had to kind of go through their reports line by line and figure out where they found that number from. You can find it in an IMF report from this year, and you're like, oh, it's the same number. But they don't tell you that, so you have to do a lot of investigating. The circle verification took place. The G20 quotes the WHO, then the WHO cites the G20. Right? So they're kind of backing each other up. So some assumptions came in at this return on investment. Assumes a COVID-like event will take place every 40 to 50 years, which is historically not the case. But that drives the model, right? In fact, the citation they use to prove that is a fact actually says, it's a Marianani piece in 2021, says every 209 years. So it's actually not, someone cited an element to back up a claim that says something different than what they say. And it's there, you can see it. It's not, the beauty of this project is we're using their own data. We're not generating any new data. We're just pointing out flaws in their data. It assumes 100% mitigation rate to outbreak costs. So it assumes that if you prepare for a pandemic or an outbreak, that you can mitigate 100% of the economic costs and full social costs of an outbreak on day one. Now, any outbreak that's already an outbreak would have costs. And so that's a real rookie error. But of course, that's going to inflate your return on investment, because with COVID at 14 trillion, 10 billion a year for over 5 years will result in an over $14 trillion return on investment. Sign me up, right? And so that's part of the problem with that. They also assume that there will be a transmission blocking vaccine within 1 to 3 years of an outbreak. Now, that didn't happen with COVID, so that's not a model we suggest. And historically, there are lots of outbreaks that don't have viruses. But I'll tell you how they think they're going to get that 1 to 3 years in a minute, and that institution is already set up. Includes all economic impacts and outbreaks as unavoidable costs. So what they do is they don't disaggregate the cost of response with the cost of fighting or preventing the disease. So in my country, I'm American, but I lived in Britain for the last 30 years, we had something called Dine Out to Help Out, where the government would pay 50% of your dinner bill to get you to revitalize the healthcare, the hospitality sector, because it's been decimated because of the lockdowns. So they gave us money to go out to eat. It cost billions of pounds. That cost is a necessary cost to fight the pandemic under this model. So it doesn't disaggregate direct and indirect costs at all. And it just includes all of them together. And it doesn't take into relative disease burden. Now, I'm going to give you a graph from them now. This is what the World Bank and the WHO used to prove that we should spend this kind of money. These are the economic impacts of these outbreaks, right? And this bottom black line you see here is the global annual economic impact of HIV, TB, and malaria put together. Malaria kills about 600,000 people a year, mostly children. TB, about 1.3 million people a year, year on year on year on year. People in their most productive parts of their lives, so you have high economic costs, GDP levels go down, etc., less productivity. And then HIV AIDS, we know that this has been a killer for a long time, and it's quite strong. But they say it's only, their economic costs are only around 22 billion combined. And all these other ones, like SARS that killed less than 1,000 people, and MERS that killed less than 1,000 people, these have these extraordinary costs. What they don't also tell you is maybe it's the responses that are driving up the costs. These, really overreaching responses. They don't address that. So they don't disaggregate, so the outbreak costs are impacted by all costs. Of course, COVID-19 is going to be super expensive. You need a broken line because it costs 14 to 27 trillion, depending on who you ask. This is falsely low at 22 billion. And this sort of makes it look like, hey, look how bad these outbreaks are compared to these endemic diseases, these year-on-year-on killers. And just TB alone, according to the Lancet study in 2021, TB alone's cost would be up there. So if you start adding HIV and malaria, these outbreaks start to look less costly. I mean, anyone who's been to South Africa, or anyone who's been to South Africa 20 years ago, knows the impact of HIVs. No teachers. The military was cut by 25% because they were sick. I mean, huge economic impacts were involved with that. And yes, things have gotten better since aid denialism is gone, but these are costly. So these models set up a win-win-win. It would be illogical, according to them, not to put this money into this. But it's also slightly disingenuous, right? So we think, if you add up all these over the last 20 years, we're talking about 100 million people die. Now that's serious, right? And if we do want to care about people and their disease burdens and people who may not be able to help themselves, then when you prioritize funding, it shouldn't be 31.1 billion, which is unprecedented. I'll tell you the relative numbers in a minute. Maybe we want to go to something where we know how to help prevent TB and malaria and HIV. These other ones are speculative. They call it disease X. What the next big one is. We know it's out there, but we don't know what it is. But we know it's going to be costly, right? So here's the relative numbers, and this is where it gets kind of scary, right? So in 2022, we spent about 1.1 billion of official development aid on tuberculosis, right? And malaria, you have the numbers there. But if we go with the World Bank numbers, and those are the other numbers, that's the McKinsey and Company number. Look how they just kind of coagulate together. If we go to pre-COVID ODA, what we're going to spend on pandemic preparedness will be almost 50% of what we spend globally to try to combat these killing diseases. Now, you can argue maybe we shouldn't be doing that, and certainly Trump has cut that down significantly, but they are killing year on year, and we may want to be concerned about that, not just for ourselves, but for others. And that would dig into that money significantly. So the opportunity costs are enormous. Right? So that's what they want there. And when you start looking at what that looks like compared to tuberculosis, and again, tuberculosis kills 1.3 million people a year, you're talking about relatively small disease burdens, a lot of money for a really relatively small disease burden against little money for a really large disease burden. And that might concern us a little bit. So what is this emerging? This is report 3 now. I'm excited to tell you about this. So we mapped everything. My poor PhD student spent 2 years of his life helping me map this out. It's for his PhD, so he's happy to do it, and he's fully committed to this cause. We mapped out everything that has shown up post-COVID. We also looked at what was there pre-COVID and made some comparisons, just so we could know. And what did we find? And the report will go into much more details. I'll give you 2 examples in a minute, but we found a clear acceleration. I mean, the global health security agenda has been rising for years. From the early 90s, sort of post-Cold War, it gained a lot of traction. A lot of bioterrorist stuff got in there, and so there was this merger of the military, and it sells. Health security sells, so people used it to gain interest in neglected diseases or whatnot. But it's a political process where a health problem is elevated to a security priority, the existential threat, right? And this allows emergency language to be used. We've been talking a lot about narratives in here, and extraordinary measures. The other thing that we found was that uncertainty is now a risk. Disease X. We don't know when it's going to strike, but we know it's there. And we should be hypervigilant. And we should do extraordinary measures now in order to be prepared for it. Biomedical reductionism, there is a focus on biomedical and technical solutions. I mean, we've been seeing that for a long time. but it's really now engrossed in the, and I'm going to give you two examples of why, in what we're doing for pandemic preparedness. And there's a significant increase in new public health and social measures, that's what PHSM means, without appropriate lessons learned from COVID-19. I'm going to give you two examples because I find them really interesting. This is the emerged agenda. These institutions already exist. The Pandemic Fund is on its third round of funding. The Global Health Hub in Germany, underwritten by the Germans, it's the Pandemic and Epidemic Intelligence Hub, is up and running. It's there. It's in Berlin. We have a new IHRs that were passed in 2024, which has a new category of pandemic emergency. We have the 100 Days Mission through Gavi and CEPI. The 100-Day Mission is a G7, G20 initiative that within 100 days of an outbreak, there will be a vaccine. What could go wrong? The mRNA Hub in South Africa, which is pooling learnings about how to better use mRNA to make the 100 Days Mission a reality. You have the First Response Fund from Gavi, which is taking over for COVAX. That was the vaccine distribution and payment facility. You have a new coordinating financial mechanism that's going to pay for the IHRs, but also the pandemic agreement if it gets finalized, and there is a big if there. But we're talking about that's where that $10.5 billion that they want is going to be funneled through. And then you have the new Managing Epidemics Handbook that came out in 2022, which is what you're supposed to do or the things you're supposed to consider while you're waiting those 100 days for this Savior vaccine. This is all there. This is all happening. What does the Pandemic Fund fund? Only three things: surveillance, increased surveillance capacities, diagnostic capacities, and human resources for those two activities. So it is this sort of biomedical securitization approach, which we see here. You find it, you detect it, you send it to the biohub, which then classifies it, ranks it as in terms of risk, then either a pandemic emergency is called or not. It is given to the 100 Days Mission, where a bunch of people have been working on solutions already and then can implement them quickly. I think we heard about yesterday about this scaffolding system where you can just plug in. Maybe that's it. Gavi will ramp up the distribution and payment for those vaccines, especially in low-income settings, and the World Health Coordinating Financial Mechanisms will also kick in. And then you'll have your PHSMs that you can use. It's up to countries. All of this is up to countries. You know, WHO can only give you recommendations. They can't make you do anything. Countries will do these or not, but they can make recommendations, and that's the Managing an Epidemic, which is my second example. We compared 6 pre-COVID pandemic response documents with 8 post-COVID documents, and I'm only going to focus on the Managing Epidemics 1 and Managing Epidemics 2. Because I think that it's a very interesting comparison to make. In 2019, prior to COVID, there was a recognition within Managing Epidemics that these kind of social measures will have social and economic impacts and that those should be weighed in your decision making. In Managing Epidemics 2, there is zero recognition, near zero our acceptance of harms associated with COVID policy. What we did was absolutely necessary. That's the assumption. Advised against travel restrictions, screenings, quarantines of travelers, not recommended under any circumstances, quote unquote. Now travel restrictions are normalized. These are a tool you can use to try to protect yourself. Focus on clear communication and accuracy for trust building. Now there's an entirely new section called infodemics, right? Infodemics, where you need to control and manage outbreak messaging, in order for it not to be overwhelming for us, but also that you go against fake information, misinformation, disinformation, that. Mask wearing was considered an extreme measure in 2019. It's now normalized. In fact, if you took their recommendation seriously, every flu season we would be wearing masks. That's the kind of threshold. advised against lockdowns and non-voluntary quarantines. They basically said this is a kind of a no-go area. Now it's within your PHSM toolkit, if necessary. While recognizing, this is where the near zero recognition, while recognizing that you need to contextualize these things. They do say that. So they are asking states to measure this a little bit. Advise and focus on contextualized situation analysis. What do you need to do within your specific context? In Africa, where the average age is 18 years old, maybe you don't need to lock down the same way as in Italy, in a small little village where the average age is somewhere in the early 70s, right? In this aging population of Italy. You wouldn't want to do the same policy. That wouldn't make sense. There's a failure in the new measures. In all the documents we looked at, there's this assumption, underwriting assumption, that what happened in COVID was the necessary response, and no one wants to get into it. I think Jeffrey was talking about that. There's also a failure of policy compliance. When they talk about this, they talk about it's all due to external factors, never the authorities who maybe didn't have the right information, who bungled it up a little bit, were acting on good faith but made the wrong decisions. There's none of that discussion. What they talk about is over-individualization. People are too individualistic. I'm not making it up. It's in there. And then the other thing that they say is that it's external factors like people like yourself on your blogs that are causing people to question authority, and therefore you get low compliance rates. Repair Part 2 is moving into Phase 2, and we're going to look at we have another four work packages. We're going to look at the corporates, the determinants of pandemic preparedness, looking at corporate secondary data. They do a lot of lobbying. They do a lot of, and we can find this through the secondary data. So we've brought on an academic who does this. He's a corporate determinants of health person, has been going up against the pharmaceutical industry for a long time. Wrote a great paper called the Pharmaceutical Cartelism, where it's really this cartel between the state, pharmaceutical companies, key elites, da-da-da-da-da. And that got published and was really made a splash. So we're on with him. We're doing a pandemic disease burden estimates and comparative global burden to disease because there is no set methodology for how you determine the disease burden of a pandemic. Part of our project is to be in rapid response mode. One thing that we found really useful in this project is that all of us were together all the time. We had time. Something come out on Mpox, we could write about it. Something came out on this, we could write about it. We could keep on top of the agenda. And so that is now built into the project. And the last thing we're going to do, and we just got ethical clearance to do this on Wednesday from my university, was we are going to interview these people. Anonymously. Data will be protected. They will be signed a number. People who are working on the pandemic agreement and the IHRs, people who have worked on the establishment of the pandemic fund, and those who have worked on the establishment of the 100 Days mission. We're going to interview 100 people, my postdocs and I will. And we're going to try to understand what power dynamics, evidence bases, and agenda capture are legitimate processes we're going on to form these things, because you can do all you can through the policy analysis, but it can tell you trends, but it can't tell you why. You can't get that primary source that says, look, I was in the room and this happened. I got some of it. I was on the Article 20 pandemic agreement. That's financing for the pandemic agreement. I was in Geneva. I was in the room for that subcommittee meetings, for a few of them as an expert. And I could see the political dynamics take place. Why is the only non-member state member allowed in there the two invited experts in the World Bank? Why was the World Bank in all the subcommittees? So you just have to ask these kind of questions about how it's going to go. And that intimidated some of the more low-resource states who felt like they were being pressured to kind of sign on to things, and they couldn't make all the subcommittees because they have one representative for 20-something countries in Africa group, and that person had to represent 20-something countries over 22 committees. It was just, the structure was there for these type of problems. I'm going to hand back over to David, and he'll tell you about this WHO project, and then I don't know if there's time for questions or not.
We've just got 5 minutes, so I'll be quick. But so this is the International Health Review project that Garrett mentioned, and this is fully supported by Brownstone. We have a panel of 10 people, and we cover, there's academics and public health people from Africa, from Europe, North America, Australia, with backgrounds in Asia, with backgrounds in World Health Organization, UN, etc. So it's a good international panel, some of whom have written reports on urine reform, etc. before. And, very briefly in these few minutes, but I mean, we're dealing with the WHO and the problems that we've been talking about, Garrett and I. A lot of it is driven by this. The green bit is specified funding. This is a WHO budget, their current budget. So 75–80% of their budget is specified funding, which means the funder gives money to WHO to do something. They don't give money to WHO and WHO decides what, okay, we should address TB, they're funded to do health emergencies, so they do health emergencies. They're funded to vaccinate, so they vaccinate. So that's what's happening in the WHO. And that money is coming from, and this is where it is now, it's very different from a couple of years ago even. Gates Foundation is the biggest, and then Gavi, which is a lot of Gates money and some country money. European Commission, not a country. United States, which probably won't pay that bit. It's unclear. They're supposed to pay the last 12 months, but we'll see if they do. I mean, I shouldn't say probably. They may or may not. Then the World Bank. So you get down to Germany before you've got a country that's actually paying. And this is an organisation that's supposed to be just country funded and country run. So, and the result is this, we have this very profitable system, surveil for variants, find them because they're there, it's nature, declare a threat, lockdown, 100-day vaccine, public money is running it, corporate profit comes out of it, obviously, and there are assured jobs and salaries in the WHO and these other organisations which ensure that this is going to happen and that this will run and this will expand, because all the incentives are for this to happen, and the incentives of those funders are for this to happen. So we're assuming that you need an international health organisation, that it is very useful to cooperate internationally in things like health, along with, international air travel or defence or whatever. It's useful to cooperate with other countries. There are real things that you can do better as a group. Essentially, we're doing 2 reports. There'll be a policy report and a technical report. The second, they'll be finished by the end of February, I think. And there'll be the policy report about 70, 80 pages, the other one a couple of hundred. And we're going back to basics and saying, what should public health be? What should international public health be? What should an international health organisation therefore look like? And then how does WHO match with that? Is it reformable, or would you need to get rid of it and replace it with another one? And the hope is that, otherwise WHO is going to continue, and very likely the US will go back when, regime change. So, and a lot of countries want an international health organisation. We're hoping to present with a template which will allow them to actually move to something that is much better than we have now. And we're basing it on, beneficence and non-beneficence, basically confidentiality, voluntary consent, which is an expanded Hippocratic oath, basically. And from that, we're assuming that state sovereignty and individual sovereignty are inviolable. Individual sovereignty is expressed through state sovereignty. And any intervention, any international public health.
Where's the best place to connect that? Okay, perfect. Is it on? That's fine. And is can I bring it up and around?
Yep.
That's a Naked Gun moment.
And with that in mind, so we're going back to basics and then working out what should an organisation do, how does the WHO look against that, and we'll end up with recommendations along these general lines, which is it needs to be highly decentralised, and much more decentralised even than the WHO regional offices. It needs to be such that each country can have a real impact on how any recommendation is interpreted in their region. Transparency and pluralism, obviously, financial independence from any non-state actors and from individual states. So it needs to go back to where states give into a core fund And then based on that, on priorities that are set based on the Constitution and so on, and health need, the organisation can act. You need to change radically staffing so that you don't have people in an organisation for 40 or 50 years, because you need to stop this inevitable bureaucratic self-serving, which happens in every bureaucracy and means the organisation becomes the priority and not the mission. And proportionality, as you know, Garrett and I showed, it's ridiculous at the moment. They're putting tens of billions into a few, tens of thousands of deaths a year versus the very large burdens of health, some of which can be addressed with international cooperation. And under this, the importance is on capacity building, health systems building, so that countries can no longer need to be dependent on external help. And there are a number of Brownstone papers that have come out of the discussions on this already. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you. I don't know. So we may or may not have time for questions, but I think we're at time, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you both. I'm sorry I wasn't here for the first part.
Don't be sorry. It was a very wise decision.
No, no.
Okay. So we
We're going to move that.
yeah.
All right. Do you need this mic? Yeah.
Your favorite moderator is back?
Where is she? Oh. This is...
What? Yeah.
You in the middle.
Brad.
Okay.
Rand, Father. Toby. Okay, our next panel. This is a great title. I came up with it myself. Injured America, right? Because we're going to be dealing with. What? Oh.
They're going up.
Okay. Okay. Three types of injury, right? So we've got vaccine injury, we've got spiritual injury, and we've got, what is it? How would you say? Oh, the injury from biological colonialism. Toby's great contribution here. So, Brianne, I just want to introduce you. Brianne Dressen, is that how you say your name?
Dressen.
Oh, you don't say, you say Dressen. Yeah.
But I married into it, so I didn't get to choose.
Okay. No. Does anybody ever say Dressen?
Yes.
Oh, well,
and they call me Brian, too, so whatever.
Brian? Okay. It's wonderful to have you here. React 19. Yeah. Father John Nagel. Nagel. Have I said Nagel in the past?
No.
Okay, Nagel. And during a time when because so many Catholic churches are closed, like most all churches closed during the pandemic period, Father Nagel figured out a way to maintain worship and keep his public worship open, and then fought valiantly and heroically throughout the entire period for religious rights and the rights of the workers, right? during the entire period. And he's been a great spiritual counselor in many ways to Brownstone. And I describe him as a spiritual counselor rather than a, what's the other option?
Chaplain.
Chaplain, right. And I said, well, don't you want to be chaplain? And he said, well, that would mean I would be in charge of your soul. I said, no, let's keep it with the other way. Yeah, the advisor. That's better. And Toby Rogers, who I think you officially describe yourself as a Brownstone Fellow. That's sort of what you are. But you're working on your book, and you testified at the Senate, famously now, obtaining millions and millions and millions of views for a hearing that otherwise would not have made much noise, but it's made a lot of noise. So, Brianne, why don't we talk about you? Maybe just get a short version of your story and a little bit about what happened with React 19.
Well, I was a previously healthy mother of 2 young kids, born and raised in this great state of Utah, and took the kids hiking and skiing and all of the wonderful things that we do here in the outdoors. And I was all in on the narrative at that time. I wanted to show my kids that we all can make it through hard things together, like a pandemic. And so I enrolled in the clinical trial for AstraZeneca, and my reaction started within an hour. And my 5-year anniversary is in 3 days. So thanks for everyone for celebrating with me that I'm still here after 5 nightmarish years of a vaccine reaction. So after my reaction, I was flown into the NIH and I was diagnosed with post-vaccine neuropathy. The researchers there told me to not talk about the research that they were doing on us, which we complied because they promised us that they would disclose these injuries to the public themselves. This started in January of 2021 and it continued on through June and July of 2021. After that, we realized that we were being duped. It took me a while to get on board with the red pilling. It was a very slow, painful process because I was fighting for my life at the same time as trying to unravel what all of this meant, that the drug company had abandoned me after my injury, and the government was promising us things that they did not own up to any one of them, and then the darker reality that the whole thing was a scheme to make sure that the injured were silenced and that our voices were not to be heard. Not in support groups that were private on Facebook, not in the halls of Washington, not in the media. So we started our own nonprofit because there was no help coming. And now we run a 501c3 registered nonprofit. It's react19.org. We have 36 to 40,000 COVID vaccine injured that we represent. And we have proudly awarded medical grants for $1.4 million to people for out-of-pocket medical expenses.
What led you to enroll into the AstraZeneca trial?
I had 2 friends that were healthcare workers that enrolled in the Moderna trial, and they had no problem. So they were just like, yeah, go try it.
And that vaccine was never approved in the U.S.?
Correct. So we reported my injury to the NIH January 11th, 2021. And in that conversation with the tops of the NIH, they said, oh, this is odd because we just were talking about this vaccine with Fauci and the issues that we were seeing in the clinical trials. And so this is an issue for the United States. And 10 days later, they pulled it off the market.
Oh, they had approved it?
They had pulled off, they said, you need to start your clinical trials all the way over. They said, we don't trust your data.
Yeah.
You guys are not going to get licensed.
Of course, the shot was not an mRNA shot, therefore it was probably already ready to be deprecated in a way.
Correct, yeah. I mean, every country had their own special brand, right? AstraZeneca was an Oxford product.
Yeah.
So in the UK, that was the product that they were protecting. It was all about, don't get the mRNA technology, just wait. The Oxford product, which is superior, is coming out. So the UK, there's a huge uptake of AstraZeneca and injuries just like mine. But just like here in the US, the adenoviral vector vaccines were inferior to the mRNA technology, similar injuries to both technologies, by the way. But yeah, J&J was the fall guy. There was a very small number of people that took the J&J shot. And so, but they could let the J&J shot fall and show the public, the people that I used to be, I used to believe those news sources. And they said, look, we're doing our due diligence. We pulled J&J off the market.
Here's an odd question, because I've always wanted to ask this about a person who volunteered for those trials. What were you hoping would come out of the vaccine? I mean, what did you...
Freedom.
That by getting the vaccine, you could go back to your old life?
Yes.
Did that have anything to do with whether and to what extent you would get COVID?
No, I knew that with my health status and my age that COVID was not going to be an issue.
You knew that?
Yeah, I had health professionals as family members that they were telling me what was going on in the hospital. So for me, it was much more, I'm a preschool teacher. I had my own small business at the time. There were fines that were looming over us, just like all the small businesses, even here in Utah. And one fine and I'd be out of business. So I was going to do what needed to be done. I had not had an issue with the previous vaccine. I wish I had known people like Liz Wilner, who's the founder of Open Bears that's here tonight.
Right.
I wish I knew these stories. I didn't hear a single one of them with the media that I was consuming my entire life.
It's the strangest thing you say that. Other people I've asked this question who volunteered for the trials said the same thing. All they really wanted was to do their part and making life go back to normal again.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, because you knew COVID was not really a threat to you.
Correct.
Yeah.
But it was, but it's the same motive of what I do now. I did it then out of love.
Yeah.
And I did it because I wanted to help my fellow man.
Right.
But what I didn't realize is what I'm doing now is a truer measure of love.
Right. How do you, I appreciate also your point about just like how strangely, I don't want to say, well, I will. This entire topic is sort of taboo. It's like nobody really wants to talk about it in some way. I guess the question is, why is that? And in part, is it because the companies themselves bear no liability in any case? So therefore, like, who cares? I mean, there's nothing that can be done anyway, so maybe we just don't care about it. Or do you think that there's some more malevolent reason why we hear so little, I think, about vaccine injury?
Well, after living with this part of it for 5 years straight, I started out with giving them all the benefit of the doubt. Oh, it's busy, I'm sure they're all overwhelmed. That's not why I'm not hearing back from the drug company. That's why I'm not hearing back from the government, right? But then once we started having these meetings with the tops of the FDA, and we were having these meetings with the NIH, and then they brought us out, and only then, and then we got censored on social media like all of you wonderful people, and our private support groups got shut down where people were literally trying to figure out, how do I stop dying today? It was only then that I realized how malevolent this is, that it's not just, we need to keep these guys quiet so we can make sure that the rest of the world is saved. There's something else, definitely something else there.
Has your attitude adjusted in terms of your evaluation of the extent of the problem? Did you think maybe you were the exception or the very, very, or as Fauci used to say, very, very rare, right?
Yes, that's definitely changed after crossing paths with so many, just from the COVID vaccines and then expanding that into the HPV vaccines, the flu vaccines, the childhood vaccines, and seeing we are just the latest version of a rinse, wash, and repeat pattern.
That goes back
a very long time.
So you've gone full rabbit hole in terms of...
Yeah. The person that I was 5 years ago today would not recognize the person I am now.
In your outlook and your attitudes. Okay, I'm just going to hop over to Toby and ask you to chime in on this with any comments you might have on what Brianne said.
Yes, so Brianne's experience is extraordinary, and we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are injured by COVID vaccines. My entrance point to this conversation came from doing a PhD in political economy at the University of Sydney. And in political economy, you follow the money. And what's astonishing, and so my topic was the political economy of autism. And so I looked at the politics and economics of the autism epidemic. What's astonishing about following the money is that in the case of autism, the science and the medicine are relatively straightforward. We know with reasonable certainty that about a dozen toxicants in the environment and the vaccine schedule are causing the autism epidemic. What's strange is that the autism epidemic right now is costing the U.S. $300 billion per year, and government does absolutely nothing about it. Now, government can move heaven and earth to respond to an epidemic. The autism epidemic they don't respond to at all. So it turns out autism is not a scientific question. It's not a medical question. We have the answers to that. Autism is a political economy problem. Why does government do nothing in response to an epidemic that will cause the collapse of the United States within our lifetimes on the current trajectory? So, as I've worked on this for the last 10 years, I've come up with various narratives, and many of you follow my Substack where I have 300 different essays. But the biological colonialism argument that Jeffrey alluded to goes something like this. So, for the last 500 years, if you were a nation that wanted to get rich, the way you did it was you built a bunch of ships, you loaded them full of soldiers and guns and horses, and you sailed from Europe to the New World, and you took their stuff. You took their gold, you enslaved their people, you forced people to work in the gold mines and that sort of thing. That's how Europe got rich, that's how the UK got rich. And so that's the historical pattern for 500 years. 500 years of colonialism. And then later there was neo-colonialism with unfair trade deals that kept enriching Europe and the United States. And then more recently with the backing of the US military, we can get third world nations to produce stuff for us for low cost that make us feel rich. So historically for 500 years that's been the pattern. Here's the problem. At some point, there were no new lands left to conquer. And so what the ruling class decided was that where the money is, the peasants to be exploited were the middle class in the United States and throughout the developed world. And how do you extract wealth from the middle class? You do it through iatrogenic injury. So if you can get the entire population to inject their kids 72 times during childhood, and then get all the rest of the population and the kids to take COVID shots, and you can injure them, you can enslave them for life to chronic illness. So in my research, I show that autism, lifetime care costs for autism are in the range of $5 million to $7 million per kid. That's a lot of money, and it goes somewhere. And it goes to the pharmaceutical industry, the hospital industrial complex, and the ruling class. And so with COVID shots, what we have is, so picture a middle-aged woman in Orange County, California, who gets a COVID shot. And then she gets myocarditis. So now she has to do regular appointments with a cardiologist. She's in and out of the hospital. She's sick. all the time. So over the course of the next 5 to 10 years of her life, her healthcare costs are going to be in the range of about $2 million. And that all goes to pharma, doctors, and the pharmaceutical industrial complex. If that same woman was enslaved in a gold mine in South America, you could only get about $20,000 worth of labor out of her. The most, if you worked her to the bone. And then she would, eventually perish, the old model of colonialism, right? But in 5 to 10 years in the US, you can squeeze $2 million out of this one person through iatrogenic injury, through a COVID shot that causes myocarditis, that sends her in and out of the hospital for 10 years of treatment. And so the insurance company pays, the government pays, she mortgages her house, her family pays, it extracts all wealth out of her and her family, and then after 10 years, the pharmaceutical industry allows her to perish. So the crisis that we're in right now and why we're all just traumatized all the time is that Western allopathic medicine has become a machine to extract wealth out of the middle class, working class, and lower classes in the United States to enrich the pharmaceutical industry and the ruling class through iatrogenic injury. That's the crisis that we're in right now, and it was already happening with autism and other chronic illnesses in children before, and then it just blossomed in size during the COVID epidemic and the response and the junk science COVID shots.
Yeah, when you first presented that theory, I thought, well, that can't be right. But I can't stop thinking about it. So thank you, Toby. Yeah, Father, on the question of injury, you care for souls. And you have been a good shepherd of your flock for these difficult years.
Tried.
What kind of insights would you have to offer?
I'd like to suggest that undealt with moral and spiritual injury is perhaps our greatest roadblock attempting to move forward, because we are all, without exception, morally and spiritually injured from having to live through what we lived through. I'm spiritually, morally injured. Some of the dictates that would come up from the diocese, there were a few nights there where I was just convinced that we as a whole of clergy should just be sent off to hell immediately, and all that's left is a bottle of bourbon, All these other times of trying to compromise. Only way I can get in to give sacraments to people in the hospital is to wear the religious garb of the branch Covidians to get into the hospital. I know a priest, he was locked out of a nursing home. They weren't going to let him in to anoint someone who was close to death. So he took off all of his priest garb, put his play clothes on, and lied and said that he was her grandson coming to visit, and then they let him in. I once had to get in a car with the son of a woman who was dying in a nursing home. They weren't letting anyone in. So we had to park outside of the window, and I just gave an absolution from there, leaving it in God's hands. The fact that we had to live in this system is moral injury. And that changes who we are. If we suffer well, it can be a profound moment that leads us in the direction of sanctity and holiness. But it can also cripple us. There are so many people who were going to church religiously at the beginning of March of 2020 that don't go anymore. Why? Because circumstances transformed them from being the type of person who does go to church into the type of person that doesn't go to church. And virtue's a habit. Is anyone who's attempted to have a gym habit, How many days does it take of missing until you never go again? Even more so when it's more difficult than mere physical. Then you go through the world. Teachers intentionally cooperate in a system that's rendered entire years of students functionally illiterate, perhaps for life. Healthcare workers, some of the good people we know that were in FDA, CDC, that were just trying to keep their heads down, trying to make incremental changes. That moral injury, I would suggest from the religious point of view, it would be a great opportunity to go to confession, embrace prayer, fasting, giving alms to the poor, the normal ways where we admit guilt, even if it's mitigated by circumstances, and we just resolve to do better, and we trust in love and forgiveness and move forward. But even apart from that, our attempt to bring message means that we're going to people outside who are morally injured and can't deal with the weight. So there's clergy that can't deal with the weight that a bunch of souls aren't going to church and they're partially responsible. There's a bunch of healthcare workers that can't deal with the fact that people are dead because of the decisions they made. Yeah, they were following orders, but that's a heavy weight. We need to be vulnerable enough to admit our moral injury to others so that they recognize that there is a sympathetic, safe space for them to open up and admit their moral injury. And if we don't do it, well, they've already come up with a counter plan. Preparing for this panel, I was just horrified Googling moral injury. It came up. You know, moral injury was just added in September of this year to the DSM as a mental health condition. And there was a group out of Harvard that did the research, and you know what their first paragraph justifying why it should be? Healthcare workers during COVID. So it needed to be added to the DSM, and so now you can have talk therapy, and you might even qualify for antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds just for you to get over it.
Yeah.
If we don't deal with it in a responsible, human, authentic, humble, vulnerable way, they already have the solution of making you not feel so bad about what happened. And that's the roadblock.
Yeah, and I think I opened up this whole conference with an overwhelming sense of frustration about the fact that Brownstone's practically alone. I mean, there's other organizations, but we're the main voice probably in the English-speaking world, if not the entire planet, that's trying to draw attention to what happened over the last 5 years, and the frustration with that. But what you're suggesting, Father, is that this isn't just a PR problem. This is really a spiritual problem, and it's that the dealing with the reality of what happened is essential for reconstruction of ourselves and the social order and the systems. And the analogy is very interesting about the bishops haven't really apologized, right, for what happened at all. And AstraZeneca has not apologized, right? And
They're too busy getting knighted.
And Toby's dealing with a huge machinery out there that hates your guts. But they're not admitting any wrongdoing.
Yeah, confession of sin isn't very popular in these recent decades. Build off what Walter Kern said about narrative. You know, Elon Musk has a favorite video game, Deus Ex. It's an amazing plot. It's about rich and powerful people who have endeavored to control the government and the world by first creating a virus and then creating the vaccine to solve the virus.
Wait, that's the game?
Yeah, and AI is controlling all of the internet to shape what you can do and can say.
That's the game?
That's the game.
Oh.
It came out when I was, I think, in college, around early 2000s. But it's amazing this is his favorite game because all the endings are kind of awful. Your main character can join with an AI and attempt to become a new god. You can shut down the entire internet and launch everyone into a new dark age so that the tolls aren't there. Or you can join the Illuminati and just become different people that are working in the dark behind the scenes. In that ending, this is, if you want a motive about why we need to deal with this, imagine this conversation happening in a back room somewhere. The world must know by now what we've done. Know what? Only that the long night is over. The crown of government is tarnished, but that will fade in time. The riots, a fever dream. The plague, a horrible nightmare. Like everything else that's happened, such things will only be dimly remembered on waking to their normal lives. In the end, all sins are forgiven, even yours. That's what our malefactors want to have happen. Forgetfulness, so that normal is returned to, although we know it's not the same normal we had before. And they can continue working in the shadows according to whatever their malevolent plans are. That's why we need to admit the evil that's happened, and that involves our interpersonal relationships, being humble, admitting any complicity we had, even if through silence, and just trying to actually turn this into, if not a religious conversion, at least a moral conversion.
Mm-hmm. You know, we've faced this problem from the very beginning with Brownstone, that more and more people are coming around to this point of view. And I think we decided very early on to just be welcoming. You know, no matter where you were, like you signed up for enthusiastically for the AstraZeneca trial, you know. And I, while thinking that this potion was ridiculous, never imagined that it would be harmful, you know. So we've been kind of a welcoming community to anybody, regardless of what your opinions were in the past. You know, come on in and please join with us. I'm wondering, Toby, as you look back in your career and your research, because you worked in a monastic level of quietude and solitude for years while working in your dissertation, and then started writing about your topics, and thereby, you know, pretty much making you, in a sense, unemployable, you know, in academia, right? I mean, that much was pretty obvious to me from the very beginning. But meanwhile, you've emerged now into you have a very major voice in public life, right? And you've seen this transformation happen. What is your evaluation of you know, this progress towards enlightenment around the topics that matter to you?
Yeah, so from 2015 to 2019, I could not tell a soul what I was working on, because universities in Australia are public. All of my emails are thus FOIAble. Any of my correspondence, any of my work product is turnoverable to the pharmaceutical industry at any point. So I worked in silence for 4 years in the basement of a library, reading everything that's been written on autism prevalence, causation, and cost. I graduated in 2019 with my PhD, and at the time, I actually thought I could survive in academia. I thought there was a path. The costs of autism are so catastrophic that I believed that both government and universities would be open to having a conversation about the fact that if we don't find ways to stop the autism epidemic by keeping toxic chemicals out of kids' bodies, that we're going to have systemic collapse. And I thought that there would be an opening to have that conversation, and that, you know, my work is broad. I look at vaccines, but I also look at any other toxicant that's a likely cause of autism as well. So I graduated in April of 2019. I'm going to lose it telling this story, but it's a fascinating story. So I come out, I want to do an academic job search, and the pharmaceutical industry is running bills in nearly all 50 states to wipe out religious exemptions, philosophical exemptions, and in the state of California to wipe out all medical exemptions. The bill in California, SB 276, means that children cannot get medical exemptions to vaccination. So your older brother dies from a vaccine, you are not exempt. You have a reaction to MMR, you can get out of the next dose of MMR, but you cannot get out of any other shot. And any doctor who writes more than 5 exemptions in their career will be investigated by the medical board and stripped of their medical license. That's the law in California right now in 2025. So I come out, I want to do a job search, and pharma's running all these bills. And these groups on the ground, mothers of vaccine-injured children, these warrior moms, are fighting back against these bills. And I know the pharmaceutical industry's playbook because I've studied it in silence for the last 4 years. I know all the data, I know all the costs, and I have to make a decision about whether to hide what I know and try to survive in academia or tell the truth. And so I enter the Twitter space, and I had Toby Rogers, PhD, MPP after my name so that I'm publicly outing myself by name, and I just start throwing haymakers wherever I can to fight against these bills. So in Colorado,
Because what else could you do?
I had a moral responsibility to fight back against this grave evil that the pharmaceutical industry was inflicting on children in America. So we fought in Colorado and won, and we beat a bad mandate bill in Colorado. And I developed this technique where basically I made lists of every Democrat in the House, in the state legislature, and every Democrat in the Senate, every Republican in the House, and every Republican in the Senate. And then I would message them every day on Twitter. So anytime they opened their mouth on Twitter, I would have a reply about how bad the mandate bill was. And it became this technique to get the message out. And then other people picked up on it, and anytime they opened their mouths and posted anything on Twitter, we'd be 10 deep in their replies about how bad the mandate bill was. So we won in Colorado, then we won in Oregon. We defeated a bad mandate bill there. Then we lost in California on the medical mandates. We lost in New York, and then we won in New Jersey, the Battle of New Jersey in 2020. We defeated a mandate bill there. So it looked like we had a model for how to build a multiracial coalition of Democrats and Republicans, bipartisan, to defeat mandate bills. And it looked like we had a chance to run the table, and then COVID happened. And everybody lost their minds, and legislature shut down. We couldn't meet with elected officials anymore.
Interesting.
The state capitol shut down. So our ability to stop these bad bills went down to almost nothing, and the pharmaceutical industry just started writing really big checks. So in 2019, when we defeated a mandate bill in Colorado, there were 10 pharma lobbyists working on the bad bill. In 2020, when they brought another version of the bill back, they had 140 pharma lobbyists working on the bill. They just wrote whatever checks they needed to win. So anyway, that was the darkness of the early COVID time, and then we all got banned. I got kicked off of Twitter. We all got prevented from speaking in public. I was routinely kicked off of Facebook and Instagram, and I couldn't get a message out. And so Substack was the last place that was left where you could tell the truth, that wasn't censored. So I started a Substack, and I just put out my message on Substack. And then I started watching the ACIP meetings and the VRBAC meetings, the Expert Advisory Committee meetings of the FDA and the CDC. And in early 2021, I figured out that FDA and CDC guidance documents require pharmaceutical companies to calculate a number needed to vaccinate in connection with any vaccine application. And I realized that Pfizer and Moderna had not calculated the number needed to vaccinate in connection with their COVID shots for kids. So I calculated the number myself and came up with, the number was something like 1.4 million shots in order to save one life, according to Pfizer and Moderna's own data. And I showed that for that same number of shots, you'd end up killing 114 to 115 kids from side effects. So you're going to lose 115 kids for every one that you save from the shot. And it was a rough guesstimate using Pfizer and Moderna's own data. So I published that on Substack, and it did 250,000 views that day. And then USA Today and Reuters came after me, did hit pieces on me, but now we were off to the races. Now I had purchase in the public square, and now I was a voice in the conversation. So now I could fight back, and I had subscribers, and I could get a message out on Substack. So long story short, eventually we found a way to get our message out through Substack, and then I met you, Jeffrey, and you get my message out to a different audience than I could reach otherwise. So you easily double my audience, and then when you republish my stuff, it gets picked up by...
Well, how's your academic career going at this point?
Well, here's the bittersweet part. Yeah, not so good. Look, the bittersweet part is this. I have more intellectual freedom than I ever would have had in the academy because of you, Jeffrey, and because of the sanctuary that you've created for dissident academics.
It's because, well, just to be clear, we have a room of donors here, and some very generous donors, and just as you're here, you know who you are. Just keep in mind what you've enabled, right? I mean, look, you might disagree with some of the things that Toby says, for now. But let me just say that, so just so we understand what Brownstone's up to here, okay? So, despite what people say, I've never been an anti-vaxxer, okay? I didn't even know what that was when I was first accused of it. It's like, well, it seems like I should know what that is if I am that. Well, I'm not sure. I think, yeah, no, I ran across your material, Toby, and I found it spooky and strange, and I couldn't understand it, really. But I was intrigued by it. But I also thought it was maybe a little bit extreme. By the way, one of these reporters the other day asked me, how can you platform an extremist? As if she, knows what is extreme and what isn't. I mean, how do we actually know that? There's been many times in history where an orthodoxy has descended upon society and pronounced what is and isn't extreme. And then, 50 years later, we realize, well, maybe the outliers were correct after all. How do you know? I mean, all you can really do is provide a platform and resources to the people who are the really creative, innovative thinkers. I was convinced that Toby was one, but not yet. But at that point, I couldn't stop reading him. And at some point, he called me on the phone, and I forget now to what, I think it was for a booster related to kids or something like that. I don't remember what it was. And I picked it up, and I thought, oh, this is Toby Rogers. I don't know what am I going to do with this. But he said, listen, I don't know what differences we have of opinions. Maybe we have different judgments on stuff. None of that matters. All that matters right now is that you use your platform to do this good thing, to stop this booster that these kids don't need. This is absurd. And Brownstone's very powerful, and you could help me. Please help me. And I thought that was such a warm thing to say, and just a loving thing to say. And I was so intrigued by it because I knew that we weren't really on the same team. I'm not sure at that point, what team I was on or whatever. But I was so touched by your piety and by your warmth and by your genuine desire to do good. And I knew for sure the kid would need that shot. So that's what began it all. But then at some point, I realized when I couldn't stop reading you, couldn't stop reading you. And I thought, well, what kind of thinkers do you want in the world? You know, who do you want out there writing and enlivening the public sphere? It's the people you can't stop reading even when they make you uncomfortable. Those are the people you like. Those are the people and that's part of our mission, is to help such people. And thanks to generous donors who've entrusted us as an institution with the capacity to rally around outlying thinkers who otherwise don't have a home, I called them up. I said, Toby, you know, I'm thinking about your research and so on. You probably don't have a viable position in academia, if I'm reading this correctly, right? He said, no, of course not. And then I said, is this the sort of thing that you need, you know, a fellowship? And he said, yeah, that would be wonderful. So anyway, I just want to thank you for giving this man a voice. So, yeah. Yeah. And Brianne, you too are devoted for your voice, philanthropic impulses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people have supported COVID-19 very generously.
Yeah.
Or
so
REACT-19, yeah.
Yeah, well, and you guys have been an incredible support for us. It's kind of tricky to see, you know, just like Toby, you get silenced everywhere, and it's like, where can you be heard? Where can you be seen? And for people that are injured, it literally is a life and death situation for them. And so you've written several times personally on our situation.
Yeah, but not enough. You know, I don't think we talk about it enough. We don't talk about this subject of this panel. We don't talk about enough.
Well, the world is pressuring everyone to move on. I talked to my sister the other day. She's a doctor, and she said, you know, COVID sucked for everybody, but the world's moved on, Brie. And that's where we're at. And so the only people that will make this right are the people that are like us in this room. Everybody else has moved on.
What do you think about this line that we need to move on?
Well, I know for sure I'm stuck in COVID nightmare until probably the day I die. Although Leslie Manoukian is inspiring me to, you know, my 30th year into my injury is going to be my best year, right? But for right now, I'm stuck in COVID nightmare, and there are hundreds of thousands of Americans that are stuck in COVID nightmare, and we'll never be able to just flip that switch off. And just like you were talking about the moral injury, there are even more people that are not COVID vaccine injured that are dealing with a deep, profound moral conundrum that they are going to just have deeply fester and fester and fester until they deal with it. And it's a very real problem. It's something that people really do need to face.
The way out is the way through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If I can add to that, in 2011, I took a transitional justice class at Berkeley Law. Transitional justice is completely fascinating. It's the field of law where a tyrannical regime has been overthrown. The revolution succeeded, Eastern Europe collapsed. What do you do next? Yeah. How do you have justice for the crimes of the old regime and set the foundation for the new future for the country? And we need a transitional justice effort for the crimes of the COVID era and for the crimes of the 1986 Act and the childhood schedule. That's foundational. So, and it's tricky to pull it off because the old guard's still around and they still have some power and they may overthrow you if you go too far, too fast. It is difficult to pull off. Every country that tries to do this does it in a different way. South Africa did a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. There was a particularly spiritual approach to these questions. We had the Nuremberg Code and the Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II that led to the Nuremberg Code, and that was one way to do it, military trials. In Eastern Europe, they had what was called lustration laws, which is where you open the books of the government so people can see how they were tracked and surveilled by the secret police and all that. I'm sure there are files on nearly everybody in this room for the work that we've done during the COVID era. What would it be like to open up the files and release those to the public? But we have to stop the harms that are happening right now. We have to pull the COVID shots from the market. We have to stop new people from being injured. That's foundational. That's a start. We have to get rid of vaccines schedules altogether and have individualized medicine for everyone in this country. That's foundational. Those are building blocks. But we also have to have a dialogue led by spiritual and religious leaders about the moral injury and the moral crimes of this regime, of the pharmaceutical industry. And then we need just compensation. We need to set aside $1 trillion to compensate autism families who've been injured by the childhood vaccine schedule, and we need to set aside $1 trillion to compensate people like Brianne who've been hurt by COVID-19 vaccines. That is foundational.
And the small businesses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is foundational to this country rebuilding and becoming a democracy again. We need to have a conversation about transitional justice. We need a transitional justice process. And until that happens, this country's not going to be able to heal.
You know, it's fascinating that we never did have a COVID commission in this country. And you know what? I think that's a victory. The reason we never had a commission is that it could not generate their preferred conclusion, which is that mistakes were made, but by and large, it was a good effort. That is not possible to say. And because they could not generate that kind of report, because there's too many of us, we would make that impossible. They decided to say nothing. I think that's a victory. I really do. Okay, we've pushed it a little bit past our time, but I think it's worth it, right? Yeah, thank you. Did I regain my title as official moderator? Okay. Yeah, okay. So I love this shirt. Isn't it pretty? We have the best swag out there. We've got coffee cups and a tie that I personally designed and very much approve of. And yeah, and this some great actual reading material, and this shirt, which is it's just absurd. When you go to a concert, they charge $45 for shirts and that sort of thing. Ours is $12. Okay, so $12. What? Yeah, no, right? Yeah, we make a lot of money from these things. Yeah. So if you don't want one yourself, buy them for your kids, your grandkids, for your neighbors and friends, whatever. Is at this point I throw it into the audience like that? Yeah. You're supposed to throw yourself in the audience. Bow ties, okay. I don't know. I did have bow ties made. I don't know if we have any here, but anyway.
I heard they're out.
They're out? Really? Are they becoming popular?
You're starting
I may have to change.
revolution.
Did anybody here go to Harvard? Anybody you went to Harvard? So there's an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and a guy says, well, when I went to Harvard, I wasn't exactly the Harvard type. Everybody else was wearing suits and ascots. And I thought, I don't think so. Did you ever see an ascot at Harvard? No. I think this is a lie. Should I call him out on this? I think this is nonsense. Nobody at Harvard ever wore an ascot. It's absurd. It's not even an American thing. Has any American ever worn an ascot? Since like 1870 or something? I don't think so. Okay. What about talking about I'm wearing white tie tonight? No Americans worn that since 1870. Anyway, we have now our panel on farming with our two panelists, two girls. No, two women lady farmers. Is that something? Of all things. Anyway, I'm so thrilled to have Tracy Thurman, who introduced me to the topic, because she wrote about this in a series of something like 6 articles for Brownstone. And I thought, oh, we've taken on enough. Now we're going to take on regenerative farming too. Yes! So thank you for your great series. Great insight. You were raised on a farm. You know a lot about this topic. And then also Molly Englehart, who, I don't know if you know her work, but she has a great new book out called
Debunked by Nature.
Debunked by Nature. She was very successful vegan chef in California. And owned several restaurants and that sort of thing, and then decided she would go full all in and get some land and start farming herself. And then what ensues is actually hilarious. So she tried to convert her restaurants over to regenerative with like meat and that sort of thing, and that didn't go so well. But now she owns a farm with her husband and like 5 kids, right? Or yeah. In Bandera, Texas. And I've not been there. So anyway, I'm so thrilled that you're here. She just arrived. You're a little late coming here. But
My flight was delayed.
I'm not sure where we want to go with this. Just to be clear about the framework here, there was something about the last 5 years that has enlightened us all into the toxicants that are extant in our environment and all the ways in which the cartelized, highly regulated industrial system has departed from what would otherwise be in a sort of a normal sort of marketplace. And that certainly pertains to our food, right? So Molly, I'm just going to go ahead.
Go ahead.
You don't know what to say, right?
No, I always know what
I need to have a question for you. Well, how's farming going?
It's hard. The hardest work. Yeah, I went from restaurants to restaurants on a farm while farming, so I've chosen really easy ways to make money in my life.
Yeah.
Right now, the place that our agrarian society is in is actually dire, and I don't think that people fully understand or get it, because you go to the grocery store, you go to Safeway or H-E-B or Ralph's or wherever you live, and the store is filled with plenty of food and it feels super abundant. But 85% of farmers are working an off-farm job in order to grow food to feed us, which means they're working for free. They're subsidizing our food, and we're losing 60 family farms a day at this point. We've lost 170,000 farms in the last 8 years. So we're in a full-on agrarian collapse, and the government's not going to save us. In fact, if I was to be a critical thinker, it actually feels like the government is doing everything in their power to squeeze farmers to the place where only large corporations will be able to grow food anymore. And so if we, the people, want food that is without chemicals, grown by people that you know and can shake their hand and can see what they're doing, and with integrity, and that the animals have some sense of a life that is worth living, we, the people, actually have to surrender some of our convenience and be willing to do the extra effort. And that extra effort probably looks like going to a farmer's market, going to a farm, spending more money. And we all have to look at, like, what is our budget, and then how much of this can we spend on the small farm diet. I'm not big on veganism, paleo, keto, blah, blah, blah. But, like, what percentage of what you spend on food every month can you dedicate to the small farm diet? And that is, like, what I want to wake people up to, because most of us don't even know that this collapse is happening and don't understand that for the first time in 20 years, beef farmers are getting some debt paid off. And Trump's like, the price of beef is too high. We need to bring it down.
Well, that was the consequence, maybe not a consequence of it, but that was a thesis I advanced in my article. You read my article, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think your article was a response. Like
my article was a response. Unpopular opinion.
Like a
beef
subtweet,
is not too high.
Yeah.
Because the cost of something has to be, here's the thing, the cost of something has to be the cost in which it takes to produce it. How could cotton farmers be paid the same amount per a bale of cotton right now as they were in 1971? How could orange farmers be getting 34% less per a pound for oranges than they were in 1978? It actually has to be, if I have a restaurant, I do have a restaurant, there's a cost of goods sold, and there's a cost of the to-go wares, and there's a cost of subscriptions and labor and occupancy and insurance, and that all has to add up to less than 90% for the restaurant to make money. But that's not how it works for farming. There's these arbitrary, beef is this, and you just have to make it work inside of those numbers.
But now, some of it has to do with how much of the retail dollar the farmer is entitled to get. Yeah, go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah, so there's a really simple solution here. If we want the price of beef to be more affordable, allow farmers to process beef on their own farm for sale to neighbors who want to purchase that and willingly consent to whatever risk comes from buying beef from your neighbor. By the way, I will tell you right now, that's a much lower risk than buying meat that has been processed, one of 10,000 cows in an E. coli-ridden feedlot situation that ran through, a factory farm processing plant.
Molly, how viable is this?
It's like, how viable is it to process on your own?
Yeah.
It's not even just process on your own farm. Every single town has a custom slaughter place where the girls take their steer that they raised for 4-H, or the boys take their deer that they shot with their dad, and it gets processed. These are all inspected facilities by the state, and we're not allowed to have we're not allowed to sell our meat from there. So let me give you.
Because they're not USDA.
Correct.
So they're not USDA.
So there's many processing plants. I don't know anything about the subject.
It costs absolute minimum $1 million to set up a processing plant. And that's if you get approved once you've got it set up. It's to get a USDA approved plant is a minimum of $1 million. I've seen people put in $4 million
and still not get
approved. And one of the problems with this, and Joel Salatin talks about this, is the inspectors often want to work in the mega plants. They've got their own rec room. They're king of the hill.
Okay.
They genuinely don't want to be in these small places. So there's a perverse incentive for them to want the plant to shut, so that they can go to a larger facility. I'm in no way suggesting every inspector is like this, but enough of them are.
Yeah.
The other issue is they have got a tremendous amount of time per chicken, per cow, compared to what they would have in the factory farm to look for issues with each animal. So they find a higher percentage of issues than they would when it's a conveyor belt going by, 5 cents per chicken.
But you're saying that there are right now many processing plants all over the place because of whatever you said, 4-H or whatever.
So, well,
The custom processing.
it's called a custom processing, where if you had a farm and you had a few steers, you could take it in and get. So the place that I process right now, because my processing plant went out of business, and so I had to find another place. They are custom slaughter 4 days a week, and they're slaughter for the government 1 day a week. I brought 4 cows the other day, and the inspector was sick. So my cows are already there, and now I have thousands of pounds of beef that say not for sale on it. My option was to drive and go pick up my cows and bring them back, and then take them back when their next date was, which is however long, or to have all this meat that says not for sale. It was done in the same place by the same people under the same standards without this lady looking over their shoulder.
It's incredible. It's
And
incredible.
this week, so then I had to take more cows because I can't sell this meat, so I just have to eat it for my family. I had to buy more freezers, had to take more cows, and then I needed it by Friday because we had a big pumpkin patch, and they said, the inspector had to leave early because they had a family emergency, so we couldn't we killed them and they're hanging, but we couldn't grind them, we couldn't cut them, we couldn't nothing when the day came that it had hung for whatever amount
and
of
just
days.
to be clear, all of this traces to federal regulations.
Yes.
It does. And the other piece of this is people should know this is a monopolized system. There's a meat processing cartel. It's 4 major companies. Smithfield is owned by the Chinese Communist Party, essentially. JBS is Brazilian owned. And these 4 companies control it. When you buy beef, I believe it's about 70 cents on the dollar is going to the processor, never to the farmer. And if you're trying to schedule in an animal for slaughter, it may be hundreds or even more than 1,000 miles from your home. And you may be scheduling that animal for slaughter a year before that animal is born. Because that is how much of a bottleneck these farmers are facing. And so it's such a simple solution. Allow small custom processors to process, or farmers to process on their own farm and sell a steak to their neighbors.
Right.
It's that simple.
And all of this, for history buffs, traces to the 1906 food and whatever, all because of the sausage thing.
But when
The meat packing thing. Yeah.
And the Federal Meat Inspection Act, which was a little
That's it. Yeah.
But when did we decide it was the government's job to keep us safe?
Yeah.
Like, why are we such a bunch of little words I can't say on stage that we're scared to drink some raw milk? We're scared to eat a steak from our neighbor. I mean, my kids are raising meat rabbits and selling it to their neighbors. That's legal. You can kill, on Texas, you can kill rabbits and chickens on your farm, just nothing bigger than a chicken. But like, why are we terrified of food? Like, when did we become this weak of a people?
Yeah.
That's my real question. Like, where's our own responsibility in anything? We have no responsibility. We want to pass it off to daddy government.
And it all comes down to informed consent. I should be able to contract with any farmer that I choose to have informed consent to consume their product, period.
100%. And I'm not arguing to get rid of the system that we have. For those people who want to go to Walmart and buy a hamburger with 1,000 different sets of DNA, which I think causes incoherency in your body. Human beings were never meant to eat 1,000 animals at one time. It's not natural. We killed an animal, we ate that animal. We killed another animal, we ate that animal. That's what we're made for. People that want that and feel safe with that should have every right to go to Walmart and buy that.
We're just asking for the alternative to be allowed.
We just want the right to I want the right to sell some raw milk without 1,000 pages of herd share and the possibility of going to jail anyways.
Yeah. Now tell me about this herd share thing. Now, this is like a workaround, right?
Yes, sir.
Because you can't just open up a retail shop on your farm. And now,
you can open up a retail shop. And in the state of Texas, you can sell raw milk. So 22 states, you can sell some version of raw milk. It might be pet food. It might be that you can sell it only on the farm. You want to know the shirt I want to make? It's very controversial.
Okay.
Raw milk the real white privilege. Make it available to all. It's white and it's a privilege. Anyways, my husband and others will not. They said I'll get labeled as a racist. I can't have that shirt in my farm store. But so there's all these workarounds, but ultimately raw milk is only available in very few states in the grocery store, and California is one of those states, but there's only one company that was able to do the compliance, and it's owned by a lawyer. So that's the level. And so in Texas, if you want to sell raw milk, you need to have a facility that's inspected by the state, and you need to only sell on the farm direct to the consumer. You can't take it off the farm.
I see.
And you can't sell yogurt, cream, soft cheeses.
Yeah, it's got to be the milk.
Just the milk.
Yeah.
And so
and every state's different, right?
And every state is different.
Because you see, the microbiome of the milk, the biology differs at the state line. Like, there are certain pathogens that deactivate the base of the
I see. Yeah, I know. Like in Connecticut, you can't. There's all sorts of raw milk farmers, I guess you would say, that can sell through retail shops. But no yogurt, no heavy cream, no ice cream, whatever.
Because of course, when you take the milk part and just keep the cream part, it gets very dangerous. Yeah. It separates in the
also
jar.
Butter.
So
Very
butter,
dangerous.
very, very dangerous.
Okay, but can you sell like a chicken pot pie from your farm store that you made?
Yes, but I have an inspected kitchen because I have a restaurant on my farm. So I have a food service.
I see. So you can sell it retail because you have a restaurant.
But now the government has just come in and said that I don't have the right kind of septic tank for a restaurant. And the kind of septic tank they want me to have for a restaurant is aerobic, which means they spray the water back out. You cannot have that next to food production. That is, FDA says no to that. So they are essentially saying I have to choose between the restaurant or farming, but the whole concept is a farm-to-table restaurant on the ranch. So I'm going to have to do like a private supper club or some kind of PMA because they're saying I can't. But if I was only open for weddings or like private parties, they're saying it's because of the grease that's going into the leach field. But I don't really believe that because I built that kitchen inspected for events and it was totally fine. And once I opened to the public, they were like, oh, you can't be open to the public and have that kind of septic tank. It's a brand new $57,000 septic tank, and now they want me to put in an $80,000 septic tank, and I said, well, you can't do that. And they said, oh, well, then you'll just have to build a leach field. So that's 120. So I have to do it aerobic, but with a leach field.
Okay,
so.
I'm sorry. What is a leach field? Is that your medicinal?
No, a leach field is when you're not on city thing. It's trenches in the ground so you go into a tank, it holds the solids in the tank, and the liquids go out into 4 feet under the ground into gravel, and it infiltrates into the ground. This is how that goes. Here's the crazy thing. If you have 10 acres and only one house, you don't even need a permit for a septic tank in Texas. So there's all types of gnarly things happening over there. But my $57,000 septic tank is somehow not appropriate, and they're trying to close down my restaurant.
Isn't it crazy, too? It's in Texas, of all places, which you'd think would have...
I moved from California to escape this kind of bureaucracy just to find out that all these people that wear "come and take it" on their shirt are like quick to call the county and you want daddy government.
Yep.
Yeah. Tracy, you were involved in the case that concerned Amos Miller with the Amish raw milk case.
Yeah, that was the reason I got involved in that case was that we found out that through a third party that the USDA was planning to use Amos as a test
Do you know about
case.
this case, Molly?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and so they were planning to use Amos as a test case, and once they had him as a precedent, there was a list of dozens of small farms that were going to be taken down next using that precedent. And when I found that out, I said I have to get involved and do everything I can to try to, at a minimum, slow this down. But basically, he was serving as like the proverbial the boy with his finger in the dike, preventing the flooding from happening. And I'm pleased to say that Amos is still in business and thriving at this time. He's not allowed to sell in Pennsylvania. because the state of Pennsylvania was able to block him from selling in Pennsylvania without a license. But given the Commerce Clause, Pennsylvania is not allowed to legislate on interstate commerce. So he's in a strange situation where he can sell in everywhere but the state that he's actually.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason he won't take the license is that his customers want raw kefir, they want raw butter, they want raw cream. And when I was investigating this on behalf of the legal team, I found dozens of people who literally depend on his products to survive.
Yeah.
There are people with Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, mast cell activation syndrome, for whom the raw milk, and in many cases it was the kefir, served as the medication that they needed. We had patients who had blood work pre and post. They had colonoscopies pre and post, and it was a perfect control because we had a patient, before they started with his products, they had severe ulcerative colitis. Then they started consuming his raw kefir. They went into remission. Then Amos was shut down and stopped shipping. They could no longer get it. It fully came back, and we had colonoscopies for each stage showing this. And so we brought these to the court, and we said, look, if you shut him down, you are costing people their health.
And they said that's on our RCT.
But we were, but that is, I believe that is why he was permitted to continue, why the judge permitted him to continue selling outside of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
But the problem with what you're saying and with what Amos is that just exactly what you're saying, people are not accidentally walking into my farm and buying raw milk and thinking that it is pasteurized and then upset when they get home that they got raw milk. That's not what's happening. Everybody is fully informed into what they're getting, and they want that thing. People are coming to Amos, they're coming to me because they want to know that it wasn't sprayed with chemicals, it wasn't fed GMO corn, it wasn't.
There is a growing consumer demand for better food, right? And more.
And it's healing. It's healing. I mean, this is, you know, I think that food freedom and medical freedom, as I say in my series, they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
If you care about medical freedom, you need to care about food freedom. You cannot care about one without caring about the other, because what you take into your body through your mouth can be just as dangerous as what you take in through a needle. And this concept goes back a long time in terms of matching these concepts. I believe it was Bertrand Russell who said that in his book, The Impact of Science on Society, that in the future, diet, injections, and injunctions would combine to produce the sort of personality that the authorities would consider desirable. And that all would be miserable but believe themselves to be happy because they would be told that they are so. And I would think very hard about that, because this is decades ago predicting that diet, injections, and injunctions would be used to control us. So most of us are very well aware of injections and injunctions from the COVID era. But many people still haven't picked on that diet is the third leg of that diabolical stool. And if we want to heal, we have to eat right. If we want to eat right, that food has to be available. And so I think that a lot of people who are going on psychiatric drugs are doing so because of deficiencies in their body. Their mental health is a result of poor physical health. But we have this population-wide issue with this because our diet is so poor. And unfortunately, I don't think that's an accident. Because if it was an accident, we would be able to, there would be so much resistance on a governmental level to fixing the problem.
But a lot of the resistance comes from the large corporations.
It does come from the large corporations.
Right? You deal with this all the time, right, Molly?
But the resistance comes from the large corporations. You see people all the time right now screaming about capitalism. And I write about this extensively. We're not practicing capitalism anymore. There is no capitalism. Capitalism is the natural state of a human to create something and create value, and then people to give them an exchange of value. But we have all these large corporations that actually have the government hands tied, that then ties all the hands of the smaller entrepreneurs and makes it impossible for us to compete. And on the other, to add to what she's saying about medical freedom, they're also using the same playbook right now for the pesticide liability shield. So the pesticide liability shield, they tried it on the state level. It did get passed in Georgia. And then they tried to put it in this appropriations bill. It didn't work there. And now it's in the farm bill, and it looks like it's going to pass. It doesn't look like there's any resistance.
Well, there is resistance, but it's just not enough.
Not enough resistance. But the thing is that what happened when we gave the liability shield to the vaccine companies? We went to all these vaccines. What is going to happen when we give liability shield to the pesticide companies? We're already experiencing male sperm count down crazily. We're already experiencing all this infertility, and what she's talking about is mental illness connected to the lack of microbiome in our gut. I just wrote about that as well. People are saying, oh, we have a gun issue, we have a mass shooting issue. No, we have a microbiome issue.
Exactly.
We have very unhealthy people because we don't have the microbiology. A normal person living in the wild, like how we used to live, would have 300,000 species of microbiology in our gut. A healthy person in our society has about 5,000, and when you go below 3,000, you start to have illness. And so we have got so disconnected from the soil, so disconnected from our food, and all of our food is highly overly washed. I know that sanitation caused a lot of health, and nobody's saying we should go back to like not washing our hands and eating poop. That's not what anybody's saying, but that we are so far removed. If we can remember to our grandparents or great grandparents, depending on our ages, that they would pick peas and shell them at the kitchen table and eat them, though they didn't dip them in bleach or quat or any kind of sanitation. We just ate them, and we continued to have this relationship with the soil, with the nature.
Right.
How often are kids swimming in natural places anymore? Are they playing in dirt in natural places? We are so sterile, and we're growing our food in incredibly sterile environments. We have to remember that Roundup started out as an antibiotic and then was a drain cleaner, and then from drain cleaner we're like, oh my gosh, it kills everything at the end of the drain. Let's spray it for weeds. And then we're like, oh my goodness, let's not spray it on weeds. Let's spray it directly on our wheat so we can harvest it on a schedule. We don't have to wait for the weather. We can do it. So we said at some point, spraying it underneath an orange tree 14 days before harvest was okay. But then without any additional testing, we started spraying it as a drying agent directly on our oats, directly on our barley, directly on our wheat. And then we're like, everybody's allergic to gluten. No, you're not allergic to gluten. You're allergic to Roundup.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
It's ridiculous. And so, but there hasn't been any additional testing to say it's safe. It's 14 days. The testing was done to spray around the bottom of an orange tree, an avocado tree, an apple tree, around the base 14 days before harvest. But we're using that same 14 days, we're spraying it directly on the oats so it dies, because you understand it's a drying agent. It dies. So now you have, I can get the right amount of moisture and I can harvest on a schedule. And when that happens, we're literally eating that Roundup. The Roundup, they say it's totally safe to eat. For the body that we have, like the skin bag holding our soul, yes. But everything with a shikimate pathway, which is all the microbiology in us, it has the same effect as it does on the plants, the weeds, or the
God.
wheat.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
So I just spent the last year in Europe, and where there is, I know Brett has spoken about this as well, but everybody that I talk to over there that is fine with bread, so many of them tell me, when I come to the States to visit family, when I come to the States to visit friends, I can't eat the bread. I get really sick. And this is one of the big differences.
Yeah.
But because it's so pervasive in our food system here in the States, we aren't aware of the level of damage it does. And I think this is one of the reasons, honestly, that so many people do get better on keto. Isn't just that we are better off without the carbs, it's we are skipping so many of the pesticides.
Yeah, we're not
that we
eating
would
the Roundup.
otherwise take.
Yeah. That's unbelievable. Well, this topic is a little bit overwhelming to me because it is pretty scary. And meanwhile, we're looking for export markets for our grains, right? Which is all this crap that we...
The subsidy issue is ridiculous, because if we stop subsidizing corn and soy, which are empty calorie products, we would have so much more land for regenerative agriculture, for permaculture, for rotational crops, for growing truly nutrient-dense food, and for room for more grazing. But instead, we subsidize the farmers, we get them locked in a system with patented GMO seeds, and we are left with this system where we are eating calories without nutrition. And for me, caring about this came from the fact that, why do I care so much about health freedom, medical freedom, and food freedom? It's because, for me, the key to recovering from a vaccine injury was what I ate. I had a severe vaccine injury when I was 20 years old. I took the Gardasil vaccine, and within a short period of time, I was in a state where every time I stood up, my heart stopped. I had to drop out of school. I was put on Social Security disability. And my student loans were written off. You have to be in bad shape for that. They monitor you for 5 years. So after 5 years, they said, you're done, you're toast, you'll never do anything. We're literally writing you off. And for the longest time, I believed that. I believed I was never going to have a chance at health. And, you know, not to get a little mystical with this, but I was so desperate to heal that I basically made this deal with God. And I said, if you heal me, if you allow me to heal, I will do whatever you ask me to do for the sake of humanity. And shortly after that, I started to get better. But the big one for me was discovering raw milk.
Yeah.
And I had a complete microbiome reset.
Yeah.
The glutathione in it, I think, helped tremendously, and I began to improve. And so the first thing that I did was then come out and start defending raw milk farmers and regenerative agriculture. And so I care about this deeply. And then I went carnivore, which for me was the next step to really recovering. And so you wouldn't know to look at me now that I'd been through this, that I spent 13 years essentially in bed. But when I say that health freedom and medical freedom and food freedom are opposite sides of the same coin, this is why I say this. There are so many people in this country that are sick, that think they will never heal, that believe that they are locked into whatever this illness is that pharma is profiting off. And instead, we can heal. A huge piece of that, is changing your mindset, is believing that you can heal. Because if I think it was Henry Ford who said that whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. You have to believe that you can heal. But true food is medicine, and we can heal. And I'm sure you've seen similar things. But this is why I'm so passionate about this issue.
And Jeffrey said it's overwhelming, but we don't want to overwhelm you. And I know that it's overwhelming, but it's not going to take everybody, but it's going to take a loud 5% to make the difference. Mm-hmm. And right now we are in an emergency. It might not look like how it did in the middle of COVID, but that's what's happening to farmers right now.
But losing the farms, poison population, deep ignorance, sanitation obsession. This is very interesting.
The sanitation obsession is just causing more and more. I grew up with a mother that, we peed on the side of the road. She wiped my nose with the bottom of her skirt. I've never been vaccinated in my life. And
you're not recommending all this.
I do recommend that. But I had my first child at 37. I had one 2 years ago at 45. I believe that the reason that is because I grew up on a farm. I grew up with good microbiology. I wasn't vaccinated. I've barely ever taken antibiotics. I just lived life like the way people used to. And I think that matters. And as far as the raw milk thing, I did 46 days only raw milk last year. After having
that's right.
That's
in your book.
It is in my book.
That's actually a crazy part of your book. There's a lot of crazy parts of your book.
But I had gained weight with each child, and I've been breastfeeding 11 years straight right now, and so I couldn't lose weight. And I eat really clean and really healthy, and I couldn't lose weight. And I was researching for a friend who was struggling post-COVID vaccine, and I didn't get it, but she had no bifida bacteria. Like, how can she get bifida? And I was looking at what age groups have the most bifida, and before I was going to tell her to do a raw milk fast, I was like, I should try it out. So I did 46 days.
You didn't say how long this was. Your book.
46 days.
Okay, your book did not say that.
Just raw milk.
Okay.
I lost like 40-something pounds, totally reset my gut, all my cravings for anything. But more important than that, I never felt fat. I work on a farm, I'm active, and I felt pretty good. But people were like, when I changed my restaurants to meat, they were like, obviously you're obese and you're stupid. You shouldn't say anything. And so I was like, maybe I should lose some weight if people are on the internet or say I'm obese. But what I did notice is when I first wake up in the morning, I used to have a little pain just in my joints and just the first couple.
That's never happened to me. I don't know what that means.
And do you know that it all went away? Literally all the inflammation, all the pain went away. And I went from a size 10 to a size 4 and completely shifted everything for me just by doing raw milk. And it totally upside downs the idea calories in, calories out, because I'm 5 foot. I never take in 3,000 calories
Just
a
to be
day.
clear, this all raw milk diet for 46 days, does that
Yes.
exclude, for example, cocktail hour? I mean,
No cocktail hour. Yeah, no cocktail hour, no sugar, no. I
I'm not sure
always
about
give
this.
up coffee for Lent, so I gave up coffee and raw milk. But I think you could do coffee with your raw milk fast. I don't know. But I did no coffee, no raw milk. I mean, no food, just raw milk for 46 days.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend it to anybody that's struggling with almost anything, because it was life-changing for me. And now I've recommended so many people, and people have reversed arthritis. People have reversed all types of stuff on their skin. What is it called? Eczema. All types of things. And it's all related, because when a baby is breastfeeding every day, and then it starts to eat food, it's not that the breast milk has all the perfect microbiology. It does have some of it, but it lays the foundation. It's like the foundations for all the homes for all that microbiology to get into. And so you're resetting and you're re-putting all that microbiology back into your gut. And raw cow milk is like 90% the same DNA as breast milk. And so breast milk would probably be too expensive to do a gallon a day. So we'll go with the next best thing.
I actually did the same thing with beef. I had been in a severe car accident and suffered a bad TBI, and I was desperate to recover from this brain injury. And Dr. Ken Berry, who some of you may be aware of, wonderful guy, I talked with him, and we're friends, and he had told me to go on just beef and tallow for 30 to 60 days, nothing else, just that plus salt and maybe trace minerals. And I had the same experience you did. So I had done the raw milk, but never exclusively. I had the same experience when I went with just beef and tallow, of just an incredible health recovery, like, body pain, all of that just went away. And this is, again, where I feel so strongly that so many of the things that are being treated as, pharmaceutical deficiencies are really nutritional deficiencies.
100%.
And, nobody is deficient in Prozac. Nobody is deficient in benzos. You may well be deficient in key nutrients that your body needs to survive and thrive. And so for the pharmaceutical companies, keeping the food system one of high calorie, low nutrient density is an absolute godsend for them.
Okay, we don't have a whole lot of time. I want to get back to this issue of reforming. This country had, centuries of being mainly an agricultural nation, and it's appalling that we've turned our back on this and now are doing what we're doing right now. But now we're seeing a growing consciousness. I know in Connecticut, where I live, you have to have a subscription to get raw milk because the demand is so high. I mean, everybody wants it, but it's not just about raw milk; it's about everything. Every small farmer in Connecticut's under pressure, and it's a calamity happening. But we do have a rising consumer demand for good food, and a rising public consciousness to the problem of the food cartels that are running everything. But what seems to be the hang-up with reform efforts?
It's federal regulation.
Federal regulation, and it's that I don't know. So I've gotten some inside information from what was supposed to happen last week. There's supposed to be a big announcement. A bunch of ranchers went to D.C. to talk to Trump, and then Trump got mad, blah, blah. But I don't know that Trump even really understands the difference between the American ranchers and the JBS representatives that are telling him what to do. Not in a disrespectful way. I just don't think he understands. And these people have lobbies. I don't have a lobby. Amos doesn't have a lobby.
Right.
And so there's these huge lobbies, and the JBS people have literally gone to jail, paid fines for bribery, for all this stuff. They have a way to get what they want, and now it's a publicly traded company here in the United States. The small farmer doesn't have a lobby. And you're saying the demand in Connecticut is so great, and I love that. But we could use my friend Steve Jarvis. He's obnoxious, he's loud, he's a great farmer. He has 100,000 followers on Instagram. He's about to leave 20,000 pounds of potatoes in the ground.
Right.
And he couldn't get 1,000 people to buy a box of potatoes for $75. That's what he needed to do to break even. So this is somebody that's doing regenerative farming. He's got a huge following. He's boisterous. He's funny. People follow on Instagram. but that didn't translate into being willing to send $75 for a box of potatoes. They're like $2 and something a pound for potatoes. That's crazy. But we're literally willing. I paid $14 for a coffee today in the airport. Like we're willing to.
You did?
Yeah, at the San Antonio airport. Okay. So I think that we have to realize that people say, oh, $8 a pound for ground beef is crazy. You can feed 4 people with that $8 plus a couple of extra dollars for whatever vegetable or whatever.
And not just that, but you and I both know how much would we be spending on medical bills if we weren't eating right. So people aren't figuring out, if you're paying up front for the food to the farmer, or you're going to be paying on the back end to the medical system, and you're going to suffer in the process. Like once you think about it that way, it should change the way you calculate this. And I'm well aware not everybody can afford to eat this way, but if you can afford to go to Starbucks, bluntly, you can afford to eat this way.
Yeah, it's usually nonsense. So I'm very interested in seeing growing education, public education about these matters. Your book, Molly, is debunked by nature.
Yes.
And it is a wild read. It's just so fun. I highly recommend it. But she's a wonderful writer. You write almost every day for Epoch now, right? I mean, you're sort of my competitor, actually. Which is kind of funny. That's fine. But so I highly recommend her book is just great. I mean, you should get it. I wrote a glowing review of it. I guess I don't know if that boosted sales at all, but
We have to hope.
and I hope that Brownstone could be your next publisher. Yeah, that
We would love that.
That'd be really nice. Now, what about this thing called the Beef Initiative? Are we on board with that or not? Do you know it?
The Beef Initiative?
Yeah,
That's Brianna. Yeah.
Yeah.
that's good.
But
No, I mean, it's anything that's supporting small farms and small ranchers and getting people to buy directly from them rather than from the cartel, I would support.
And your best advocate in Washington is?
Do we say this one in unison?
I would say that honestly, you have more faith in Washington than I do.
But if we have an ally, it's Thomas Massie.
Yes, I would say that Thomas Massie. Well, I would say that Thomas Massie is the only person in Washington that I trust at all. He's brought the Prime Act so many times; it's never gotten out of committee. But that's what essentially the Prime Act is saying. Exactly what she's saying is to be able to process on farm to a certain degree, and then in those local processors at another number. But ultimately, I think it has to go deeper than the Prime Act. It has to be, let's say, up to $500,000 a year, $1 million a year. If that's what your sales are, you can sell, and you're selling direct to the consumer in your own state. I think you should be able to process. You should be, and informed consent. The consumer can come, they can look, they can see, and they can be able to make that decision. I don't believe that the government should make decisions as to what I can eat for me and my family. It just doesn't make any sense. And so I would say that Thomas Massie is our only ally in Washington, and I want to believe, and I would say that in some ways I'm super disappointed in the Maha blah, 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 but in other ways we're really happy that vaccines and things are being talked about on the front side of things and food dyes and everything. But when you're seeing that happen and then you're seeing the farmers getting squeezed in all these other ways and no real action being taken, and I just want to go back to the corn and soy thing that she said a minute ago. This idea that we need to feed America is a lie. I mean, feed the world is a lie. We need to feed our communities. And people are saying, well, if we do diversity of crops, what am I going to do with my $500,000 combine? Guess what? Only 10% of the corn that you're growing is being eaten by humans, another 25% by animals, and the rest is being turned into ethanol. I would say that growing gasoline is not the best use of our farmland.
That's right.
I'm just going to say that. Like, growing gasoline is not the best use of our farmland, and so you don't need a $500,000 combine. Get an older, smaller, used combine, grow the corn that your community needs, and corn is not the devil, and corn is not bad for us. It's what we've done to corn.
But wait, you told me that your corn on your farm is different.
We grow Oaxacan green corn. My husband's from Oaxaca. Okay. And so we grow this ancient variety of corn that's green. But here's the crazy thing.
And you said you'd send me some blue tortillas.
I'm going to send you some blue tortillas. When we genetically modified corn to take Roundup, We also genetically modified it to no longer have a mycorrhizal relationship with the soil. So all summer grasses create this beautiful mycorrhizal and fungal relationship with the soil. So sorghum and Sudan and Bermuda, all the summer grasses. Corn is the largest of all the summer grasses. When we genetically modified it to take Roundup and be Roundup ready, and I do not think by accident, we also genetically modified it to no longer have that beautiful relationship with the soil, so man can be the dealer of fertilizer and not the plant and the relationship as God asked us to do it. And so corn is not the devil. If we take corn and we mistectilize it, use lime from limestone to make it digestible, we boil it and we grind it, it is good food. When you plant a corn seed, it can grow like this tall before it can take any nutrients from the soil, just from the calories in that little corn kernel. Corn is, and it's on small farms, it actually can be harvested by hand at a scale big enough to feed a pretty large amount of people. And that's why indigenous people grew it for a long time. We have made corn something that's a Frankenstein version of what it was. So corn is not the problem, it's what we've done to it. And old varieties of corn is actually good for the soil.
Yeah.
Right. It's the Frankencorn that's the biggest
And we
issue.
graze our we grow corn and then we graze our cows on what's left after we harvest it. And then we plant a cover crop for the wintertime, and that's a completely workable system.
And as far as the solution goes, because I think to me, like there's, you can curse the dark or you can light a candle. Part of the solution here isn't waiting for the federal government to step in with a solution.
They never
big
will.
part of this is you decide what farm you go to, and you decide whether you care if that farmer is licensed. You decide that for yourself. Personally, most everything I buy is from black market farmers. Now, just think about that for 1 second, how insane it is that I am talking to you about a black market for food in this country. That's the insanity of the regulation system that we have. But almost everything that I eat is from black market farmers because I've gone to their farm. I'm my own inspector. I trust what they're doing. I love how they do it, and I want their food exactly the way they make it. So find local farms. If you have difficulty finding one in your area, there's a resource called farmmatch.com that you can go to and see if you can find one in your area. If there's nothing in your area, you can find a farm that may have drop sites in your area, if you're in a city. So many cities have farmers on the outskirts who make a trip in once every 2 weeks to do a drop. You can also go to places like localharvest.org and look for small local farms that you can patronize yourself. But I encourage everybody, get to know your own farmer. And be your own inspector.
My friend AJ Richards has From the Farm, and he always says shake the hand that feeds you. So if you want to get meat, mail order from some of these farmers, I'm on there, and then go, you can, if you can't find someone in your area who's doing it with the integrity that you want, then I recommend that you do mail order to someone.
I don't think we said the name of your farm.
Sovereignty Ranch.
Sovereignty Ranch.
Okay. Sovereignty Ranch in Bandera, Texas.
Yeah.
If y'all want to have a conference, we have 40 beds. We have a conference room. We have a restaurant. It's a whole little village, and we grow all of our own protein and a bunch of our own produce. And it's a beautiful valley in the middle of the hill country.
My mother lives not too far from you, so I'm going to come see you at some point. You're going to host a supper club.
We're going to
right?
do a supper club.
And you've come a long way to be with us, Molly. We appreciate it. Are you staying for the gala dinner tonight?
I am probably not.
Oh, really? You have to head back?
This is all I have. This is all I will.
I just
flew on the airplane with this.
No, yeah. It's okay.
Like that.
It's good, yeah.
It's okay to be
black
dressed
tie, black hat.
tie.
It all works. Well, thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Molly.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much, and you are more than welcome to stay. I hope you do.